Alright, so far we've got a very exciting program that has a label and a text field on a frame. And the next thing we want to look at is adding a button. And so I'm going to come down here below the text field and say I want to create a J button is what we call it. And I can say button OK. This will just be an OK button. That's a new J button. And what goes in the parentheses is what's going to be the text of the button. So I'll just say OK. Alright, and then after we've created the object, we need to add it to the frame, and so I'll go to the home screen frame and add. And you can picture, by the way, if I had multiple frames, I can add stuff to different frames from within the same method. And now I'm going to add button OK. I'll compile and run this, and what I get is a button out here on the side that says OK. Now, I didn't necessarily want the button to be on the side. I kind of was picturing it coming down here somewhere. This is one of the problems with using a flow layout is it's an automatic layout. And so it's easier, but you give up control to get ease. And suddenly we're talking about government and politics. Anyway, sorry, different story, different day. So the problem is we've got this OK button here that's there because I said just do a flow layout, and it just so happened that all three things would fit on the same line. So if I want to drop down to another line, I've got to make my text fill a little bit bigger or make my frame a little bit smaller or something like that so that it gets down the next line. And now when I run this, I get my OK button down on the next line, and it's in the middle because there's nothing else on the line, so it centers it. And so I click on this button, it doesn't do anything. And that's exactly right. I haven't set up any action associated with that button. And so that's what we're going to do next. But one thing I want to kind of talk about here is we've got all this stuff in this main method, and this really isn't a good way of doing this. What we want to do is to create a separate frame so that we can start to add this action into our program. We're going to try and do it more the right way because this is not the right way of doing it. We normally wouldn't just do everything in the main method. That was the good old days. We used to do that. But where we've kind of now introduced this idea of object-oriented programming and objects and all of that, what we want to do is to create an object. So I'm going to create a second class here, public class, and I'll just call this the home. Okay. And this is going to be the class that does all the frame stuff. Okay, so I'm actually going to just kind of modify what we've done here. In fact, maybe I'll just do it again quickly to kind of review what we did. So we want to create the frame. So we can't just start doing stuff here in the class. I can't say, JFrame. Actually, I could say that, but I can't start calling methods and stuff inside the class. I need to have some sort of method, and so we remember that each class has a constructor, or can have a constructor associated with it. So I'm going to create a method, a public method that's not going to return anything. It can't return anything, also called home, that I don't need to pass anything into, but this is the constructor, meaning it's the method that will be called when we create an instance of this home object. Now this, I'm picturing like the home screen, the main screen. That's why I called it home. And what I'm going to do in here is then start building these objects. So I've got a J label. Or I guess first of all we need a J frame, right? J frame, and I think I called it home screen, and that's equal to a new J frame. And we won't do anything with that frame yet. Now, by the way, one of the problems that I'm going to have is if I want to modify anything on the frame, this frame only exists while this constructor is alive, right? Between this brace and this brace. And so this comes back to this idea of scope. Do I really want to define the home screen inside the frame home screen inside the constructor? And the answer is no, we don't. So what I'll do instead is come out here and I'll say I want to create a JFrame here called home screen, and I won't set it equal to anything yet. I'll just define it up here, and then down here I can say, remember that home screen object I defined? Now I want to set it equal to a new frame, and this will work much better this way. Okay, so what do we add next? Well, I'm going to go in and create a J text field. Again, I'm going to do it up at the class level so that every method in the class can access these things, and so that they'll stay in memory as long as this home class is in memory. And actually it wasn't the J text field that was next, it was the J label, right? So the J label, and I called it label name. Okay, and then down here I can define that. So go to that label name and set it equal to a new J label, and I think we said enter your name. Okay, again, I'm just redoing everything I did in that other one because it should be broken out into a separate class probably. And then a J text field, text name, and then we did a J button, button, OK, right? So I'll go ahead and define those things. So the text name, the J text field, is going to be a new J text field, 20 wide, and then the button OK is going to be equal to a new J button that says OK. Okay? And then after we get done with those things, then we want to set the home screen. Well, and actually we've got to define some other things, don't we? Because we created the home screen, but we didn't do anything with it. And so we want to do those other things that we talked about. So home screen, we want to, let's go back and look and see what we did. We want to set the size. So set the size equal to 400 by 200. Okay, we want to set the title to GUI fun. We want to set the default close operation. So what's it going to do when we press the X? So set default close operation equal to home screen dot exit underscore on underscore close, and then we also set the default layout, or set the layout. So we're going to set the layout equal to a new flow layout, opening closing parenthesis. Okay, so this is all part of that setup that's going to happen as part of the constructor when the object's created, and then I'm going to build these buttons. And then after we build the buttons, what do we want to do? Well, we want to add them to the form. So I'm going to go to the home screen and add the label name, and then I'll go to the home screen and add the text name, and then I'll go to the home screen and add the button OK. And then after I'm done with all that, what do I want to do? Well, I want to set home screen to visible. So all of this stuff is, or home screen visible true. Set visible to true. Sorry. So that's all this program does so far. Okay, I'm going to save this one as home. Okay, oh, and I forgot to do my imports. So what do I need to import? Well, the first main thing is the javax.swing.asterisk, which will get us the frame, the label, the text field, the button, Actually, so far that's all we need. Oh, no, sorry. So we did have the layout, which is part of the, do you remember? The java.awt.asterisk library. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is replace all this code that was in the main method. I'm going to get rid of it. And all I'm going to do in this main method is to build an instance of the home object, which I'm just getting done defining. So I'm going to say go out to that object and grab home and create a new instance of it, and I'll just call it main screen. Main. I can't use main. Actually, I probably could, but I'll just call it H equals a new home. New home. Man, these videos are lame. Okay, so now what happens is when I compile this and run it, is it's going to create a new instance of that object. So everything is being done inside the home object in terms of building the frame, setting the size, setting the tile, setting the default close operation, setting the layout, creating the elements, and then adding the elements to the screen, and then setting the visible equal to true. This is a much cleaner way of doing things. We really, generally speaking in programming, we want the main method to do as little as possible. We want to offload everything to other methods and keep it nice and compartmentalized so that every object basically has a specialty of what it does, and then we call those objects. It's a much better way of programming. And so anyway, that's all this method is doing. That's the whole method right there, is just building an instance of this home object, and then that goes in, calls the constructor when it's loaded, and then sets everything up. Now, truthfully, all of these probably ought to be private because we don't want other elements being able to come in and access them. So we can make all those private, and it should still work the same. Whoops, can't run that one because there's no main method in here, right? We got to go over here and then build an instance, and we can call that class. And then the main method is going to drive everything. It's going to say which screen to bring up and which screen to hide and all that kind of stuff. And then we have our screen here that we built. Now this is not going to be anything exciting because when we click on it, it still doesn't do anything. And so what we'll do in the next video is add the action that we want to perform when the click event occurs. But I did think it was important, and I wanted to show you that we can take all that stuff we were doing and do it in a separate class. And hopefully it was helpful to kind of go over it again of what we needed, the steps we needed to go through to be able to get this form set up. All right, events next. I'm excited. Spencer out.